These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. On June 1, 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, known as Black Wall Street, was burned and erased in about 16 hours, ending hundreds of local businesses. Many lives were lost, and some victims still have no known resting place. In 1847, Irish families fled famine on crowded ships, where disease and hunger claimed up to 20% of lives. They became known as coffin ships, a stark symbol of a nation in flight. In the early 1900s, children as young as 5 worked 12-hour days on tobacco fields, with nicotine soaking through skin and making many sick. These stark images helped drive child labor laws and a change in public will. From 1932 to 1945, as many as 200,000 women from Korea, China, and the Philippines were taken by the Japanese Army and kept in comfort stations under force. Almost all pictures were banned, so the few that survived now stand as quiet evidence of what many tried to hide. In the 1860s, thousands of English children aged 5 to 8 worked as trappers in coal mines, sitting in dark tunnels for 12 hours to open and close air doors. From 1951 to 1962, the United States ran nuclear tests while placing troops 1 to 2 kilometers from the blast center. About 250,000 service members got strong radiation exposure. In spring 1940, the NKVD killed over 22,000 Polish officers, teachers, and police in the Katyn Forest and other places under a fixed plan. The Soviet government denied it until 1990 and blamed the Nazis. On April 14, 1935, a giant dust storm called Black Sunday turned day into night across 5 states and drove families off the Great Plains. During the Dust Bowl decade, more than 2,500,000 people left their land as dust-filled homes. On May 8, 1902, a French photographer captured Mount Pelee just hours before it erased St. Pierre in about 2 minutes. A pyroclastic flow near 1,000 degrees left only 2 survivors, while his plate endured in the ruins. In 1927, the Chinese herbalist Li Qingyuan claimed he was 256 and showed papers naming 1677, saying he outlived 23 wives. In 1972 on Guam, Japanese soldier Shoichi Yokoi was found after 28 years hiding since the war ended in 1945. He lived in a cave, ate small animals and frogs, made clothes from tree bark, and said he felt deep shame for coming home alive. From 1953 to 1973, the Central Intelligence Agency funded a program called MKUltra at more than 80 sites, testing mind control ideas on unwitting patients. People received a hallucinogenic drug for up to 174 days, strong electroshock up to 30 times in a session. For about 1,000 years in China, some girls had their feet tightly bound from ages 4 to 6 to create 7 centimeters golden lotus feet. The long ritual reshaped bones and limited walking, and it signaled family status. On November 7, 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge swayed for hours in 40-mile-per-hour wind, and its deck twisted about 45 degrees before it broke apart. An engineer filmed the final moments. On May 18, 1980, geologist David Johnston radioed, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," at 8:32, moments before Mount St. Helens sent a fast blast toward his post. The automatic camera took this frame 1 minute earlier. In 1912, a self-taught German inventor reportedly ran a machine for over 40 days with no outside power, leaving engineers stunned. He destroyed the device and the plans, disappeared without a name, and debate over this perpetual motion photo still lingers. In the early 1900s, some women in Mongolia accused of adultery were put in small wooden cages about 60 by 60 by 60 centimeters and carried across the steppe for weeks. Russian travelers recorded it, and outside pressure helped end these public punishments. On October 8, 1963, engineers recorded a huge crack above the Vajont Dam, but villages were not evacuated. That night, 270 million cubic meters of rock hit the reservoir, and a wave about 250 meters high wiped out 5 towns in 4 minutes. On July 12, 1993, a tourist photographed fissures on Okashiri Island as the sea pulled back 2 minutes before a 30-meter tsunami arrived. Everyone in the frame was lost, and the camera was found a week later with this last view. In 1942 at Dachau, doctors put prisoners in ice-cold water for up to 3 hours to measure survival for the Air Force. About 300 people were used, and 90 died. On November 13, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. said voices told him to act, and 6 relatives were found face down in an Amityville home. A year later, the Lutz family left after 28 days, and the house became America's most famous haunted legend. After 1945, some Korean survivors came home with 3 dots on the wrist, a quiet pledge to remember friends from wartime comfort stations. Of about 200,000 taken, only around 1/4 returned. On November 13, 1985, Nevado del Ruiz melted summit ice and sent a lahar that buried Armero under about 5 meters of mud in 2 hours, taking 23,000 of 29,000 lives, including the photographer. In the 1890s, doctors photographed people with lymphatic filariasis, a parasite disease that blocks the lymph system and can make one leg weigh about 40 kilograms. It still affects more than 120 million people in the tropics. In 1875, thousands of English children aged 4 to 7 climbed into 25-centimeter chimneys as sweepers and often got stuck in the narrow flues. Bosses even lit small fires to push them out. In March 1974, Lieutenant Hiru Onoda walked out of the Philippine jungle after 29 years, still obeying wartime orders. He lived on coconuts and rats, sewed clothes from bark, and surrendered only when his old commander canceled the mission. On April 4, 1933, the United States Navy airship Akron hit a storm over the Atlantic and went down within minutes. Only 3 of 76 aboard survived. A rescue craft also went down, and this remains the deadliest airship accident, a largely forgotten chapter. In 1935, a Soviet diver reached 100 meters in a canvas suit with a copper helmet, staying 15 minutes without a decompression chamber. He fainted from nitrogen narcosis, but survived, later describing light euphoria, odd visions. On March 28, 1979, at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, more than 100 alarms were missed while the core overheated for about 5 hours. Half the core was damaged. A hydrogen bubble nearly burst the shield. On July 25, 1976, Viking 1 photographed a mesa in Cydonia that looked like a human face from orbit. Later, high-resolution images showed a normal hill shaped by light and shadow. Yet the eerie first view still sparks talk of ancient ruins. In the 1890s, some German clinics treated mental illness by blasting patients with ice-cold water under pressure for 30 minutes, saying it could reset the mind. The method was later condemned and ended after many suffered serious harm and illness. In 1963, a farmer in Cappadocia knocked down a basement wall and found a door to Derinkuyu, an underground city cut in rock with 18 levels reaching about 85 meters deep. It could shelter around 20,000 people with animals. In the 1890s, prisoners walked about 11,000 kilometers in chains from European Russia to Vladivostok, roughly 25 kilometers a day for a year. On Sakhalin, they faced life labor in coal mines with average survival near 7 years. In the 1880s, opium rooms in China held many people on narrow beds, taking smoke dozens of times each day as foreign trade pushed the drug into the country. 2 wars were fought over this trade, and visiting photographers sold these scenes to Europe as images of a mysterious East. In 1847, during the Great Hunger, food was shipped out of Ireland under guard, while local families faced empty tables. Over 7 years, about 3 million people either left or were lost, and some tried to eat grass. In the 1830s in Brazil, Some plantation owners forced runaways to wear iron collars with long spikes, so the person could not lie down, pass through a door, or move unseen. The collar could stay on for months as a public warning. In the 1820s, psychiatrist Joseph Cox used a spinning chair that reached about 100 turns per minute, believing centrifugal force could rebalance brain fluids. It was used daily for up to an hour. In the 1870s, some people in China were punished with a heavy wooden cangue locked around the neck and wrists, sometimes weighing 50 kilograms. They stood in public for days and had to be fed by passers-by, a slow ordeal designed to shame. In the late 19th century, Russian holy fools chose harsh winter trials, wearing heavy iron chains, walking barefoot, and living on scraps to seek grace and visions. Many people saw them as living saints, and even the royal family asked their advice. In the 1860s, Chang and Eng Bunker, conjoined at the chest by a 13-centimeter band, became global stars, married 2 sisters, and raised 21 children while rotating between 2 homes every 3 days. Starting in 1908, Russia used barred Stolypin cars to send political prisoners to Siberia, packing up to 80 people in dark cages for journeys that lasted weeks. Many died from disease and hunger on the way. Between 1865 and 1869, about 12,000 Chinese workers blasted rail beds across the Sierra Nevada, often lowered in wicker baskets over cliffs to place charges while earning roughly half the pay of white crews. An estimated 1,200 never came home. Until the 1960s, many Amazigh, Berber women in North Africa, wore facial tattoos called tiksvit. Dots on the chin signaled marriage, lines on the forehead marked clan and were meant to block the evil eye, and motifs echoed stars, looms, and desert paths. This widow in a cage scene matches a famous early 20th century postcard trope. Historians note most were staged for exotic drama, not a real common practice. Still, it points to strict honor codes that praised lifelong widowhood and public display. In the Welsh coal fields up to 1914, girls as young as 8 hauled 25 to 35 kilogram baskets for 10 to 12-hour shifts, their faces black with dust. Society scolded the unfeminine work, but poverty drove it. June 28, 1914. This image captures Archduke Franz Ferdinand minutes before a wrong turn in Sarajevo placed his car beside a nationalist who had already abandoned his plan. That single navigation mistake became the spark for World War I. In 1920, Marrakesh, a Garib carried a goatskin tank weighing about 30 kilograms, selling a sip for a copper coin when street water was the only option for many. Piped water in the mid-20th century ended the trade within a decade. In the 1890s on Sakhalin, escaped prisoners were tracked by Nivk hunters for bounties and hauled back in irons. The penalty was 100 strokes and a doubled term. Many perished in the taiga cold. Passengers dined in style aboard a mid-1930s German transatlantic airship, white tablecloth service, panoramic windows, and even an ultralight piano in the lounge. Crossings took about 2.5 days for a first-class fare. Early 20th century Greek sponge divers free dove to about 70 meters, gripping a 15-kilogram stone to descend fast, then hand-harvested sponges for up to 3 minutes before surfacing. Many later suffered the bends from nitrogen bubbles. Early 20th century Finnish loggers felled 300-year-old pines with 2-man saws, working waist-deep in snow from sunrise to dusk at minus 30 degrees. The falling giants were unpredictable, accidents were frequent, and pay was so small, many spent it on spirits just to chase away the cold and fear. In the Klondike of 1898, prospectors sometimes lifted nuggets the size of a child's head. One lucky strike could turn a pauper into a millionaire overnight. Of the 100,000 who trudged over the Chilkoot Pass, only about 300 left rich. In the 1920s, rows of switchboard operators worked 10-hour shifts, plugging cords hundreds of times an hour while supervisors timed every pause with stopwatches. Turnover was brutal and breaks were rare until automated exchanges in the 1960s ended the job. Circus strongmen of the 1920s staged jaw-dropping feats, hoisting full cars on reinforced shoulder rigs that spread the load. Yet the athletes still absorbed hundreds of kilos and relied on elite technique and core power. Victorian clinics used traction tables with straps and counterweights to straighten spines, stretching patients by several centimeters during long sessions. Marketed as modern science, the treatment stayed popular into the 1920s, despite widespread pain and serious side effects. Shadow play masters in China could guide up to 30 puppets at once with bamboo rods, casting dancing silhouettes across a 10-meter screen through all-night epics. Apprentices trained for decades within family troops. Asmat warriors in New Guinea once displayed carefully cleaned and feathered skulls in the men's house, believing they carried the strength and spirit of rivals and ancestors. The custom was banned in the 1960s under Dutch rule, yet elders in remote villages quietly kept family relics into the 1990s. An Arctic field team set a tiny camp on a drifting ice floe, the bright red tent meant to be seen in the endless white. They drilled through meters of ice to sample ocean and weather as the floe slid many kilometers per day and sometimes cracked without warning. At the 1897 Brussels World's Fair, a staged Congo village displayed about 60 Congolese behind fences for paying crowds, promoted as proof of a so-called civilizing mission. In Kyoto, apprentice Maiko trained for 5 years while carrying hairstyles weighing up to 3 kilograms, their necks strengthened by long practice under heavy pins and combs. They slept on wooden headrests to keep the shape, and only those who endured this strict routine advanced to the highest ranks of geisha. In 1928, Australia launched the world's first flying doctor service, a lone pilot medic landing on dirt strips to cover an area the size of Europe. With radios and kitchen table clinics, they brought urgent care and safe berths to homesteads thousands of kilometers from hospitals, saving countless lives. For centuries in Eastern Europe, roaming showmen exhibited dancing bears, training cubs with nose rings, and strict handling so the animals would perform for coins. Romania ended the practice in the 2000s. Victorian astronomers spent winter nights glued to eyepieces in unheated domes, hand-guiding giant refractors so a planet would not drift, and a once-in-years transit was not missed. Early glass plates needed exposures up to 8 hours. Along Scotland's coasts, families knit Gansey sweaters with patterns unique to each village or clan, so a sailor found after weeks at sea could be traced home by his stitches. The wool was packed with lanolin for water resistance and warmth. Kazakh eagle hunters raise golden eagles from chicks, building a decade-long partnership where a 7-kilogram bird perches for hours while the handler's forearm bears the load. In winter, hunts the eagle dives at highway speeds to subdue foxes and wolves, then later retires with honors. Old Believer hermits in Siberia dug coffin-sized cells about 1 meter by 2, living underground in cold darkness, praying up to 18 hours a day and surviving on herbs and bark. They treated hardship as a road to salvation. Miners once carried canaries underground as living alarms. If the bird fell silent or collapsed from invisible carbon monoxide, crews had minutes to escape. The practice was officially retired in 1986 when electronic sensors replaced it. Inuit families could build an igloo in about 1 hour. Body heat and a seal oil lamp lifted the inside to around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, while outside sank near -40. They slept on fur-covered ice benches and rebuilt each fall as the spring melt returned. Indian Fakirs trained for years to lie on beds of countless nails, using breath control and focus while the dense array spreads weight and minimizes injury. Public tests stacked stone slabs on their chests as observers timed their calm pulse. In early 20th century sideshows, snake kings draped themselves in about 40 kilograms of live rattlesnakes and built tolerance by self-inoculating tiny doses of venom. But a burst of simultaneous bites could exceed that tolerance in minutes. Rubber tappers in the Amazon walked about 20 kilometers a day, cutting around 200 trees to drain latex, yet ended each month deeper in debt for tools and food. Between fever, wild animals, and debt bondage that trapped families, tens of thousands never returned from the rubber boom. Siberian sable hunters spent 4 months alone with a dog in -50, walking hundreds of kilometers to service 200 traps and sleeping under skins in snow shelters. A haul of 200 sables could mean a fortune, but whiteouts, thin ice, predators, and isolation meant many never returned. U-boat crews in World War I spent up to 8 weeks sealed in steel tubes, breathing diesel fumes, hot bunking in shifts as enemy charges shook the hull and rivets rattled. Claustrophobia was constant, and the loss rate among the worst of the war. Many boats left harbor and never returned. Starting around age 5, Kayan, Padong girls, gradually add brass neck coils, often 20 to 25 rings weighing 5 to 7 kilograms, which press the collarbones and upper ribs downward to create the illusion of an elongated neck. The ice storm of 1922 entombed U.S. telephone lines in up to 4 inches of glaze, adding tons of weight that snapped poles and muted long-distance calls for weeks. Crews rebuilt networks in sub-zero wind with hand tools, and the crisis pushed stronger crossarms. Dayak River villages in Borneo rise on 5-meter stilts, linked by narrow walkways to ride out floods and keep wildlife away. Children learn to swim before they walk. Canoes dock under the homes, and shared river water for washing and drinking once spread illness. The Kabul Chadari covered women head to toe, leaving them to view the world through a tiny mesh while overheating and often stumbling on unseen steps. Reform briefly lifted the rule in 1928 under King Amanullah. Graf Zeppelin crossed the Atlantic from Germany to Brazil in about 72 hours, a flying hotel with a dining room and cabins whose ticket cost rivaled a car. In 9 years, it carried about 13,000 passengers without a fatal accident. In 1907, Australia ran a 3,256-kilometer rabbit-proof fence across the continent to halt a booming population that was stripping the land bare. The rabbits tunneled and hopped past it, so by the 1950s, officials used myxomatosis to crash numbers by about 99%. Some sadists vow to keep one arm raised for years until it becomes fixed upright, with the fingers curling into long spirals. The early pain is offered as devotion to Shiva, and the arm stays aloft for life, a stark emblem of will over body. For centuries in Japan, married women and some geisha practiced ohaguro, painting their teeth jet black with an iron and vinegar lacquer to show maturity and beauty. The coating needed weekly renewal and slowly wore down ineme. Cowboys on long cattle drives took 4-hour night watches, circling the herd in darkness. Exhaustion ran so deep they often nodded off in the saddle, while the horse kept the loop. Across 3 months and roughly 2,000 kilometers. In early 1900s, Palermo, boys dove from steamers to fetch coins tossed by travelers, making dozens of deep plunges each day in crowded harbor water. The pay was tiny and the risks were high: cold currents, polluted docks, ear damage, and rock impacts. Yet poverty kept the practice alive into the 1950s. Mongolian nomads carried infants in wooden cradle boxes lashed to Bactrian camels, rocking for 8-hour treks across the steppe from the earliest months. Raised to the rhythm of the caravan, many learned to sit a saddle before they could walk. For centuries in Vietnam, people chewed betel quid, a areca nut with lime and a betel leaf, creating the iconic bright red smile once prized as a sign of beauty and courtesy. Despite colonial crackdowns and modern dentistry, the habit endures at rural markets and weddings, a living link to an old aesthetic. Sod huts like this were one-room homes on the open pampas, earthen floors, hides for bedding, meat as the daily food, and children helping with stock from early age. In the 1880s, fences and railways ended the open range, pushing many gauchos into low-paid ranch work or the margins of town life. Amazon, 1890s. A prospector holds a rare nugget won from a rainforest creek after weeks of panning, enough to buy land and outfit a crew. Most seekers left with empty pans while outfitters made the money, and the rush left rivers clouded by silt from simple sluices. Australia, circa 1910. Raised scar patterns were etched with stone blades and packed with ash so they healed high, each line marking clan, story, and a boy's step into adulthood. Colonial rules and mission pressure drove these rites underground through the 20th century. Transylvania, 1925. A Romani wise woman wears a live snake as a protective charm and showpiece. The cascade of silver coins is portable savings that also signals status. Her painted wagon is both home and stage. Nomad women of Tibet wove family wealth into 108 braids, hundreds of coral and turquoise beads forming headdresses that could weigh up to 10 kilograms, a portable bank, and a badge of status. Such treasure drew bandit attention on trade routes. Forest monks in 19th century Burma practiced extreme solitude by meditating for months or even years in small bamboo cages hung from trees, taking one simple meal a day by rope. They slept upright and stayed through sun and monsoon to train unshakable focus. Street fakirs in India trained for years to hold a human bridge, resting only head and heels on two stools while keeping the body straight through breath control and iron core tension. Witnesses could place heavy stones or even a person on the torso for minutes. An austere room stacked with books hints at what Japan now calls hikikomori, long-term social withdrawal that trades the outside world for a controlled, quiet routine. Today, surveys estimate around 1 million people live like this, supported by family and delivery life. A rare-cased portrait shows a South Asian woman in a plain sari facing the camera while a crowd gathers behind her, turning a street moment into a stage. Around 1900, traveling photographers sold quick pocket portraits on albumen or early gelatin paper. Early World War I hospitals used crude respirators and oxygen to treat soldiers exposed to chlorine and mustard agents, which inflamed airways and left many with lifelong breathing problems. The scale of harm, about 1 million gas casualties and around 90,000 deaths. Monks in Tibet search for a lama's rebirth by testing toddlers with the late master's objects. A child who repeatedly chooses the right relics is recognized and seated as a tulku. From about 4 years old, he trains in scripture, debate, and ritual under close guidance. Even in later years, veteran geiko keep the ritual, mixing oshiroi rice powder with wax for a porcelain base, tracing crimson lips, and lifting kimono layers that can weigh over 10 kilograms. Families on Indonesia's volcanic slopes evacuate again and again, then return because ash-rich soil grows rice like nowhere else. Marapai's 1930 eruption raced over 13 villages in about an hour, yet within a year, people rebuilt on the same ground. In Siberia's logging camps, workers swung axes for 12 hours in -60, quilted coats icing over as tools stuck to numbed hands. Quotas of 5 cubic meters tied to food rations pushed people beyond endurance. Rio's hillside favelas surged in the 1940s as rural migrants stacked scrap-built homes on steep slopes, often without water, sewage, or power. Today, tens of millions live in these self-made districts, tight-knit communities with vibrant street economies that also starkly reflect Brazil's urban inequality. For nearly 1,000 years, Icelanders built turf houses, sod walls and grass roofs over driftwood or stone, using peat and dried fuel to stay warm in a land with almost no timber. By the 1960s, most families moved to modern homes. At the Aegean volcano, miners chip solid sulfur beside 600-degree vents, then carry up to 90 kilograms in bamboo baskets up a 3-kilometer climb twice a day. Pay is about $5 per day, and years of acidic fumes often bring serious lung damage by age 40. Victorian fashion prized the wasp waist. Some women laced corsets down to about 38 centimeters, which slowly reshaped ribs and squeezed organs, leading to shallow breathing and fainting. Girls began tight lacing in their teens and even slept in corsets. Parisian embroiderers stitched by candlelight for up to 16 hours a day, counting threads so fine that many developed serious eye strain and nearsightedness before 30. While gowns sold for fortunes, the workers earned little. Yakut shamans wore iron-laden ritual suits weighing up to 40 kilograms, packed with jingling pendants and bells to call spirits, and many treated the outfit as a lifelong second skin. Even at -50 degrees, they performed in it, despite metal freezing to the touch. Victorian Britain sent boys as young as 5 up narrow hot chimneys, often barefoot and lightly clothed so they could squeeze through, their skin packed with soot. In 1775, doctors identified the first known occupational cancer from this exposure. Island colonies once housed people with Hansen's disease for life. Families were split and entire communities formed under strict rules, with children born and raised there. In Norway, one colony ran for about 80 years and remained even after effective treatment arrived in the 1940s. For centuries, China's Tanka boat people lived entire lives on 4-meter sampans, born there, married there, families cooking, mending nets, and sleeping in a craft the size of a room, labeled outsiders and long restricted from settling ashore. Russian holy fools sometimes chained themselves to church walls for years, living outdoors on alms and near constant prayer, and were revered so highly that even czars sought their counsel. The practice vanished under the new regime in the 1920s. Beneath Paris stretches a 300-kilometer labyrinth holding the remains of about 6 million people, moved from overflowing cemeteries between 1786 and 1814. Night crews stacked bones into geometric walls and skull mosaics. Prince Randian, born without arms or legs in 1871, became the celebrated human caterpillar, famously lighting cigarettes with his lips, shaving himself, writing and performing for about 45 years with Barnum and Bailey while earning a solid income. Mongol justice once used a 60 by 60 centimeter wooden crate, forcing the condemned into a tight crouch. Sealed and displayed in public, many succumbed within days from exhaustion and thirst. The practice was banned in 1921, with a last recorded use in 1924. Chang and Eng Bunker, the famed conjoined twins, married 2 sisters and ran 2 households on a strict 3-day rotation, one home, one marriage, then the other. They raised 21 children and lived to 63. When Chang passed from a stroke at night, Eng followed 3 hours later, still joined to his lifelong brother. France's final public guillotine execution in 1939 drew about 20,000 spectators, with vendors and crowds treating it like a street event and climbing lampposts for a view. Shocked by the carnival mood captured in photos, authorities moved executions behind prison walls. People with Hansen's disease in Argentina were confined behind fences like this. Families split, identities reduced to numbers, and travel blocked even after effective cures appeared in the 1940s. One colony held 3,000 residents for 60 years, with many released only in the 1990s. During the Great Depression, dance marathons paid cash to the last couple still moving. Some ran for weeks with rules like 15-minute breaks every 2 hours and partners sleeping while swaying. Slon on the Solovetsky Islands held about 70,000 inmates, cutting timber in chains through -40 winters. Many never returned. Founded in 1923, it became the prototype for the wider Gulag network that later processed millions across the Soviet Union. At Rajasthan's Karni Mata Temple, about 20,000 rats are revered as ancestral spirits. Visitors bring sweets, walk barefoot, and even share prasad after the rats have nibbled it for a blessing. Spotting one of the rare white rats is considered a wish-granting omen. During the Second World War, Imperial Japan forced an estimated 100,000–200,000 women from Korea, China, and Southeast Asia into military comfort stations. Survivors later campaigned for recognition. The 1993 Kono Statement acknowledged state involvement. Tibetan monks performed jatar, or sky burial, carrying the deceased to high charnel grounds where the body is offered to vultures as a final act of generosity and a lesson in impermanence. Sites are deeply sacred and tightly restricted. Australian authorities removed thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families between the 1910s and the 1970s, placing many in missions and dormitories under assimilation policies. Known as the Stolen Generations, survivors spent lifetimes searching for relatives. King-era offenders wore the wooden cangue, sometimes 50 kilograms, its locked collar preventing sleep and even eating without help, a sentence of public shame more than chains. Reforms ended it in 1905, yet some villages kept the ritual into the 1930s as a stubborn relic. By the 1950s, 1960s, Rio's favelas swelled to about 3 million people, with families of up to 15 sharing 3-by-3-meter shacks of tin and cardboard, often without piped water or toilets. Today, over 20 million Brazilians live in favelas nationwide. The Lykov family fled deep into the Siberian taiga in 1936 and survived off the land for 42 years with no contact, unaware of the World War, spaceflight, or even Stalin's death. After first contact in the late 1970s, 3 relatives couldn't adapt to outside food and passed away. She was a Belgian queen who left the spotlight, lived apart from her husband, the ruler tied to the notorious Congo Free State, and found refuge in horses and music. By her death in 1902, all 3 of her children had died before her. In 1920s Buenos Aires, many tango cabaret dancers performed through consumption, hiding coughing fits with powder before stepping back under the chandeliers. Low pay and relentless schedules meant some collapsed mid-performance. French Foreign Legion patrols in the Sahara feared la soif, extreme dehydration that brings confusion, mirages, and organ failure within days. This trooper was found after 8 days, his skin blistered and eyesight damaged. In 132 CE, Chinese polymath Zhang Heng built a bronze earthquake detector with 8 dragon heads. An internal pendulum dropped a ball into the matching toad's mouth to show the quake's direction. Court accounts say it signaled a distant shock hundreds of kilometers away before messengers arrived. Philo of Byzantium described a wine-pouring automaton in the 3rd century BCE that used air pressure, siphons, and a float valve to fill a cup and then switch to water, stopping exactly at the brim. By moving pegs to set the mix, it became a programmable. Found in 1901 in a shipwreck off Antikythera, this bronze marvel from the 1st century before Christ packed at least 30 precision gears to model the sky. It tracked the sun, moon, and visible planets, predicted eclipses using the Saros cycle, and even showed the 4-year schedule of the Olympic Games. In 19th century rural Japan, families stitched ceremonial outfits from thousands of seashells with patterns meant to invite luck and a rich harvest. A full set could use up to 10,000 shells, weigh several kilograms, and be kept for generations as a prized heirloom. In the 1930s, French pediatric teams tested an early artificial breast so infants could be fed when a mother was absent. A soft rubber head mimicked a latch and connected to a sterile milk reservoir, a curious step toward today's feeding technology. Victorian leech gatherers waited for hours in cold marshes, letting the creatures attached to their straw-wrapped legs before sweeping them into baskets for hospitals. Demand from 19th century medicine caused wetland overharvesting. Paris sewer rat catchers patrolled the brick tunnels by lamplight, hauling wire baskets that could fill with hundreds in a single shift as bounty payments kept markets and quays safe. Working knee-deep in water and fumes, Volga barge haulers pulled multi-ton boats upstream for up to 15 hours a day, covering hundreds of kilometers each season on foot. Harness straps carved lasting grooves into their bodies, and years of strain brought chronic injuries and shortened lives for many. In the 1880s, British officials ran controlled trials of Indian yogis who claimed to enter deep trance and remain sealed underground for weeks, with guards watching the seals. Doctors reported near-zero pulse and breathing, suggesting extreme breath control that pushed the body toward a suspended animation state that puzzled science of the day. In the 1920s, beauty brands sold miracle radium creams and powders that even glowed, promising a fountain of youth. Doctors later tied daily use to serious jaw damage and set the stage for modern cosmetic safety laws. In 1930s London, some parents used window-mounted baby cages after doctors said fresh air would build strong lungs for city infants. The trend faded once safety worries grew, and several reported accidents led officials to discourage it. 1920s Cairo hosted a brisk trade in short-term marriage contracts for visiting Europeans, often arranged outside mosques and notarized to last days or weeks. Officials and clerics moved to curb it as the practice blurred the line between tourism and paid companionship. Temple brewing in ancient Egypt was a sacred craft led by women of Hathor's cult, where large breweries ran with precise routines. Beer also served as pay and ration. Pyramid crews received up to 4 liters a day for energy, hydration, and even tax records. Persian Gulf pearl divers plunged to about 40 meters on a single breath, using stone weights, nose clips, and a tender's rope to rocket down and be hauled back up. Months-long seasons at sea brought risks from pressure, currents, and prowling sharks, leaving many with chronic lung damage and shortened careers. Victorian beauty parlors in the 1880s sold electric facelifts, wiring clients to humming consoles that pulsed current across the face to promise smooth skin. Marketed as modern glamour, the sessions often left stinging burns and lasting numbness. By the 1950s, experiments showed that trained people could use tongue-click echolocation to steer through streets and avoid obstacles, even on a bike. Decades later, Daniel Kish popularized the method and taught it to others, a vivid example of the brain-turning sound into a working map of the world. Early deep-sea suits in the 1830s used rigid claw-style arms and fixed joints, so divers moved like wind-up machines. Each suit weighed about 200 kilograms, and pressure leaks or snags on the seabed could turn a routine task into an emergency. In 19th-century Alaska, walrus tusks worked as hard currency. A single big tusk could buy a full year of labor or supplies. Trading posts stockpiled tons of ivory until heavy hunting and new rules collapsed the tusk economy. Before 1832, Britain's resurrection men secretly exhumed recent burials to supply anatomy schools, then the only lawful source of study bodies. The black market spiraled into abuses, most famously the Burke and Hare scandal, forcing Parliament to pass the Anatomy Act of 1832 that ended the trade. In the 1950s, American finishing schools drilled posture by having students march for hours with stacks of books on their heads while instructors timed each step. The syllabus paired etiquette drills, table settings, curtsies, measured small talk, and proper silence at formal events. Rome's elite rode in curtained litters called lecticae, lifted by teams of 4 to 8 porters who kept a tight marching rhythm. Long, hot routes, often up to 10 kilometers a day, wore down their bodies, and the carriers were treated as replaceable labor. China once employed tea-chest sniffers who could grade a shipment without opening it, reading the wood's aroma to predict leaf quality, harvest, and storage. Elite noses trained for 20 years, cataloging thousands of timber scents and resin notes that could sweeten, dull, or perfume the brew. Inuit builders set clear freshwater ice into snow domes as windows, filling the room with Arctic daylight while the snow walls worked as outstanding insulation. With a small lamp and body heat, the interior hovered near 0 degrees Celsius, far warmer than -40 outside, boosted by a low entry tunnel and raised sleeping platform. Paris Metro opened on 19th of July 1900 for the World's Fair, carrying 4 million riders in 2 weeks, while Hector Guimard's flowing Art Nouveau entrances split opinion. Only 20 of 141 stations got the ornate versions, and many were replaced from the 1920s to the 1960s. In 1958, Lego patented the automatic binding brick, perfecting its 1949 stud and tube design for stronger clutch power. The name Lego comes from the Danish leggot, meaning play well. 6 2x4 bricks can be combined in over 915 million ways, turning play into stealth training in spatial reasoning and combinatorics. Sputnik 1 launched on Oro 4 October 1957 and broadcast its beep beep for 21 days, triggering a surge in U.S. science funding and the creation of NASA the next year. Chief designer Sergei Korolev paired a test rocket with a small payload sphere. On October 29, 1969 at 10:30 p.m., UCLA's Charlie Klein tried to send Logan to Stanford, but the system failed after the first 2 letters, so the Internet's first message was simply LO. Funded by ARPA as a research network, this small test quietly began the Internet era and grew far beyond academia, in ways even its creators never imagined. In Imperial Russia, repeat drunkards were strapped into a bottomless wooden cask nicknamed the Fool's Bottle, forced to shuffle through town as a walking warning. Authorities sold it as a milder alternative to corporal penalties. Jacques Droz's Writer Automaton, circa 1770, is a mechanical boy that dips a real quill in ink and writes any custom message up to 40 characters. Its text is programmed by rearranging cam wheels, an early form of reprogrammable memory that previewed modern robotics centuries before computers. In medieval Europe, church officials issued begging licenses only to people with visible disabilities who were judged unable to work. Desperate villagers sometimes staged or self-inflicted injuries to qualify, turning survival into a permit system that decided who could legally ask for bread. In 1970, the Soviet Lunokhod 1 became the first remote-controlled vehicle to explore another world, operating for 11 months and covering 10.5 kilometers. A 5-person crew drove it by TV feed with about a 3-second delay. Armies pressed over 8 million horses into World War I. Practical equine gas masks didn't appear until 1916. Many animals panicked or collapsed from the strain of wearing the early gear, proof that industrial warfare demanded bravery from creatures that never chose the fight. Hugo Gernsback's 1925 Isolator was a felt helmet with a narrow visor and an oxygen tube built to block noise and sights so a person could focus on work. Test users felt dizzy and boxed in, so the concept died quickly, but it oddly predicted modern noise-canceling gear and focus hacks. Early 1900s Russian observers recorded Siberian shamans entering deep trance with heart rates near 20 beats per minute and noticeable drops in body temperature. Through relentless drumming, breath control, and ritual focus, they seemed to induce hypometabolic states that puzzled scientists and still spark debate. Max Factor's beauty micrometer mapped 325 facial points with millimeter precision to tailor makeup and lighting for each performer. In 1930s, Hollywood had standardized the on-camera ideal, turning cosmetic correction into an engineering problem that still shapes beauty metrics today. The Soviet Union became the first nation to legalize elective abortion in 1920, offering free procedures in state clinics run by physicians. A pro-natalist reversal banned it in 1936, then policy shifted again in 1955, turning the USSR into an early case study of how law and public health steer reproductive care. Early electric perms in the 1890s plugged straight into batteries, sending metal tongs to roughly 200 degrees Celsius with no thermostat or timer. Sessions could run 8 hours and singe hair or skin, yet the treatment cost a worker's monthly wage and was flaunted as a status ritual. Before radar was common, Soviet acoustic locators used huge concrete horns to detect approaching aircraft from up to about 20 kilometers away. Trained listeners could identify models by tone, but a single cough or nearby noise could wipe out the signal. By the 1890s, opium houses in Shanghai worked openly, and estimates say up to a quarter of adult men were regular smokers. The British opium monopoly sent huge revenues to the Raj, about 15% of its annual budget, until new laws began closing the dens in 1906. Krupp's 50-ton steam hammer could flatten a steel beam, or, in famed demos, crack a walnut without touching the kernel. Power with surgical precision. In the interwar years, the plant quietly kept its heavy forging expertise alive. Treat dentists in Ethiopia used simple pliers to pull bad teeth in open-air stalls for about 1 burr, with no anesthetic and crowds watching. In the 1930s, the whole country reportedly had only 3 trained dentists for roughly 15 million people, so most care fell to these itinerant practitioners. Berlin's rubble children slept in cellars of shattered houses and bartered with occupying troops just to eat. The city's population fell from about 4.3 million to 2.8 million, and eyewitness reports describe widespread civilian trauma that shaped generations. The famed Indian rope trick has never been convincingly photographed. Early 1900s images show slack ropes or ones subtly supported. A 10,000 rupee prize offered in the British Raj went unclaimed, leaving the legend as a master class in misdirection and mass suggestion. Kamikaze pilots averaged just 18 years old, with recruiters prioritizing university students they believed would be the most steadfast. Only about 14% of sorties reached their targets. Most were halted by air defenses, weather, or mechanical failure, exposing the harsh math behind the myth. Before Medicare in 1965, most older Americans had no health insurance, and many spent their final years in bare rooms like this, in low-cost homes with crowded wards and little medical help. Medicare funded hospital care and set national standards that closed unsafe facilities. From 1910 to 1970, Australian authorities removed more than 100,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families and placed them in missions and training schools to sever language and tradition. German medic Armin Wegener secretly documented the 1915-1916 Armenian deportations, smuggling his film out by hiding the negatives in his belt. About 40 of roughly 4,000 images survived after the rest were seized and destroyed. In February 1934, pilots carried out the first Arctic air rescue after the steamship Chelyuskin was crushed by pack ice. 104 people lived on a drifting ice floe for 2 months in cold near -50 degrees Celsius, and all were rescued except one. Alessandro Moreschi was the last singer of the castrato tradition in the Sistine Chapel, and his voice was recorded in the years 1902 to 1904. The practice ended by the Pope in 1903, leaving his records a rare echo of a vanished sound. In the 1960s, across Soviet cities, many families lived in communal apartments, each with one room and a shared kitchen and bathroom. Mornings ran by a written schedule on the door, and the smell of soup told whose turn it was. At Barnum's American Museum, featured performers could earn about $100 a week, nearly 10 times a factory wage, giving many people with differences steady work. Annie Jones, the bearded woman, bought homes and toured widely, but she passed away at age 37 from tuberculosis.